All right, looks like we're alive. My name is Joe Walsh. I'm a candidate for the Hendricks County Commissioner, and I'm teaming up with the Hendricks County Democratic Boosters to bring you a boosted conversation live here on Stan Albaugh's page. We're inviting Eric Shotwell from House District 28 to join us today to have some nice conversation and learn more about his campaign. And before we do anything else, I'm going to ask everyone to please share this as you're watching it. Likes are nice, but shares is what builds the momentum, and we can start turning this area a little more blue every day. So without any further ado, I'll let Eric introduce himself.
Hi and welcome. I'm Eric Shotwell from Brownsburg. I've been in Hendricks County for about 30 years, and I'm very excited to represent District 28. We have an incumbent that has been in the Republican Party for 20 years in this position, and I think there's a lot of people within Hendricks County that would like representation, and I'm the person that can bring it to you. So there are three areas that I'm going to focus on as we get started on this platform: education and our ability to support our teachers and our students, diversity and our ability to represent all people in this community, and agriculture and the challenges of our agricultural producers in Hendricks County and Boone County are very important, and I think they need to be well represented. Thanks,
Right,
Joe.
You're welcome. Go ahead, Stan, and give your little brief introduction. We all know you, but we'll let you give an introduction just anyway.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate your you being here today, Joe, and hosting this event and helping us get this information out to the people that live in Hendricks County. Most of you probably know me, so I won't do my normal elevator speech. I will reemphasize that when we started our campaign, the central plank of our platform centered around education and then closely followed by jobs. We've, of course, since with other things going on, we've, of course, added healthcare and social injustice. So that's those are the central planks of my platform. But really the most exciting thing that I want to share with you today is that we were able to convince the Indiana Senate Democratic Caucus Committee to do some polling in the district. And they ran a poll the 13th through the 15th of June. And everybody out there should know and pass the word. District 24, which includes all of Hendricks County with the exception of Guilford and Liberty Township, and it includes the north half of Putnam County, we are officially rated as a purple, as a flip county. So don't believe it when you hear Republicans say a Democrat can't win here. We absolutely can win. The only thing that we need is for you to make sure you are registered to vote at your current address and you show up on election day, and we can turn this district blue.
That's some good news. I like that myself. I'll take some of that. So we're gonna do some questions. Again, if anyone has any questions while we're sharing this, please type them in the bottom. We will definitely do our best to try to answer them in a time frame. We hope to never go over an hour, but we will do our absolute best, of course. I'm going to start with you, Eric. The first question: how do you propose we pay for rural broadband, and what benefits would come from having high-speed internet access throughout the state?
Rural broadband is quite interesting. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has a program for developing rural broadband, and 80% of the 24 million people in the U.S. that do not have high-speed internet are living in rural areas. There are some areas of Hendricks and Boone County that have high-speed internet, and we have good coverage in the areas of Brownsburg, Avon, Danville, and Liston. There are a number of areas, probably 60% of the land that's within Hendricks and Boone County for this district that do not have broadband. And what is very interesting is that this patchwork can be filled with funds from the federal government if you apply for grants. The problem is right now we have not submitted or requested any access for money to develop rural broadband in Stylesville, Fayette, you see, North Salem, Jamestown, Clayton, and Amo. So there's the whole center of Hendricks County and the south part of Boone County that has no requests right in for agricultural development within the USDA for broadband. And I think it needs to be emphasized that we should be applying for these funds. Joe?
Thank you. I agree. I think rural broadband is an extremely important thing here in Hendricks County. Stan, I'll ask you the exact same question. How do you propose we pay for rural broadband, and what benefits would come from having high-speed internet access throughout the state?
Well, I'm going to start with the last half of that question first with the benefits. COVID has made it very, very evident how difficult and how important rural broadband really is. The number of students who are trying to complete classes online certainly created or showed what a significant difference is depending on if you live in a suburban area versus a rural area. And that problem gets complicated depending on the quality of your high-speed internet and possibly how many users or the width of your broadband. I mean, if you've got 4 or 5 kids, which is not all that uncommon, especially in a rural farming household, how are they able to use that and to do their schoolwork or do the things necessary? I also want to point to that problem gets a lot worse the further west that you move. North Putnam County, for example, part of my district, in 2019, for example, 118 students as they graduated high school, not one went to college. 7 joined the military and all the rest sought employment through the Department of Workforce Development. Now, those numbers were given to me by the school superintendent, Nicole Singer. And so just so that people know my source as I'm saying that. But we're educating 2 different class systems. So suburban kids at one level, rural kids at another. And it doesn't mean that they can't achieve. It means the way the market is currently set up, it makes it very difficult for them to achieve. The same, and what we just went through with COVID, once again, how many of those kids actually completed those last semesters or the last several months of their school year versus, well, the school did the best that they could, and I appreciate their efforts, but we need to give them the tools necessary so that those kids can compete in a global knowledge-based economy. Now, the question on how to pay for it, there's a number of ways on how to pay for it. Eric certainly had some of them listed there with some of the grants and things that are available from the federal government because they recognize that this is a shortcoming and we need to do something about it. As I talk to other senators that are currently in the caucus, they all argue that the money currently exists and it's a matter of priorities. For example, we passed a lottery with the idea of the lottery being used for educational purposes. And what we find is out of that lottery each year, about 30 million goes to the teacher's retirement fund. And then about another 30 goes to the police and fire retirement fund. And then depending on the year and what the sales are, about another 160 to 200 million go to what's called the Build Indiana Fund, which means it gets distributed to the counties with no accountability on how that money gets spent or used. And so it's almost like free money to them. And so prioritizing how that money gets used, or when the state gives that money to those counties and how it gets used, if you set the right priorities, the money is actually exists here in the state and we can fix it if you prioritize it.
It's interesting you say that. I've had some conversations in my own campaign, and what I've noticed is there are private entities like here in Hendricks County, Hendricks Power, who's trying to do that, but they're not getting as much love as they probably should from the government sector. A quick follow-up with you, Eric. You made a statement. Who would submit these grants? Would it be the state government? Would it be the governor himself? Do you know how we would go about submitting these grants, and what some of these grants cover? I was just curious.
These grants can be requested through the USDA website, and the program is available for submissions. I would argue that the local district representatives should take action and should submit grants. This has been done in the past, and money has been provided. For example, Liston has a coverage area that's 3 times larger than Danville. So money has been acquired and applied to different parts of the state unevenly. I would argue that the Danville area is a very small coverage area for the population that's down there. So I think it's a matter of just getting a local representative like myself to make the submittals.
Thank you. I appreciate that. For the next question here, we'll
Can I add in on that?
please go ahead. Please.
Yeah, in 2018, I was I ran for the county council, and so I attended a lot of those meetings. And normally a lot of those grants are also applied for at both the county level and the town level. So as you move out to Liston, could Liston file for it? Yes. Could Stylesville? Yes, to my knowledge. But certainly the county would also file or could file for those grants.
That's true. And one thing I will say about the grants, I know for the state as well, they're somewhat, there's a lot of different things that go in there. A lot of, we'd have to definitely talk with some of the larger corporations like AT&T who claim that they're meeting the coverage that we're wanting. But then when you actually look at it, they're really not covering it. They're just doing it because for them, it's a business. It's not so much about helping the people. So
maybe we need to discuss making it a utility.
That would be a very good discussion. We may have to discuss that another time, which I do like the conversation. So the next question here, we'll go with Stan. So what is your post-COVID recovery plan, economically speaking?
Well, that's a tough question. Yes, I have a master's degree in business. However, it's not as simple as saying, well, just fix this, because it's going to take a lot of time for that recovery to happen. Probably the best recovery plan starts with, what are we doing today? Most studies show that if we would practice wearing a mask and social distancing, it would curb the current spikes, the things that are happening with COVID, by 90 to 92%. If that were to happen, and if we were to wear a mask and participate and protect each other, protect our neighbors when we go out into public, we could get more engagement and we could spend more money and we could be out in the economy to help it start that recovery process. So that's probably the biggest first thing. It would be nice if we had a national message that was consistent and uniform, but at least then something from the state down, we're certainly capable of doing on what's important, because then people would be more likely to go out and shop or spend their money or do something to help the economy. And so that's the first huge step, would be how we're managing the recovery process. Because until we have a vaccine and people feel completely safe, some people are going to continue to hunker down and protect themselves and stay in, which is certainly going to inhibit travel and a certain amount of things in the economy. So that's certainly the first step. The second step is obviously the vaccine. And then the third step goes on to be, what type of economic relief or help could we do to help some of those businesses grow? I am a little bit concerned about another federal or state funded type giveaway, unless it is very well constructed and very well managed. Because as I see so much of the federal programs and stuff as they've existed, what has happened is large corporations who simply have franchise operations, each of those franchise operations claim to be an independent business entity, and said as a small company, they were entitled to the PPP, Payroll Protection Program funds. And so a lot of that money got soaked up by large corporations when it was intended for small corporations. Large corporations that were franchised instead of small corporations, which is really what drives a much larger sector of our economy. So there can be some things to happen there, but it has to be it's certainly not a quick response. It needs to be very well constructed to make sure that it's targeted, or it would go to the appropriate people down at the appropriate level, not the large businesses that just claim, well, under your definition of small business, I'm a franchise and I qualify.
Thank you. So I'll go to you, Eric. What is your post-COVID recovery plan? And just talk about it on the economic standpoint.
Well, I agree with Stan. Basically, infection control and reducing the spread has to happen first. And at the same time, we need to get kids back into school. And as we start up school, if we don't manage this correctly, we are going to have outbreaks and we're going to be in serious trouble where we're going to have to start shutting schools back down again. And we've seen this with some of the summer sports programs where as soon as the students are getting into start to work together on soccer or baseball, these teams are getting infected and they are going to have to go back through quarantine. So as long as students have to be at home, it's going to be very difficult for them to get any kind of daycare or supervision. And without protecting our citizens, it's going to be virtually impossible to get this economy restarted. So people need to cooperate with the school systems and follow their guidelines and do not resist when the school corporations say, we need you to do these things. That's going to cause a lot of chaos and it's going to cause a lot of infections. As companies start up, they're going to have to start up slowly. They're going to have to develop a strategic plan with less employees, with less cash flow. And I think the impact is going to be, we are going to have to take a look at our unemployment compensation system. And we're probably going to have some people that are off work longer than we expect because of this ramp up problem. So as businesses start up, they are also going to have to be disciplined. I was in a business yesterday in Brownsburg where nobody was wearing masks. And it was a service industry, and they weren't serving food. But I made it clear to them that if they were going to provide that service to me, I needed the person that was working with me to put on a mask immediately. And they got it, they understood, and they took care of the problem. But this idea of pushing back and making a big political issue out of people wearing masks that are in businesses is going to cause a number of customers to walk back out of those stores because they don't want to be infected and they don't want to make other people sick. So I don't want to spread COVID to people in my community. The last thing is I think we're going to have some real financial hardships on people that are paying mortgages and are paying rent. And we need to continue to help people get through this process so that landlords get some cash flow. We need the landlords to be able to be paid. And we also need the people that are living in those facilities to be able to keep their homes and not to become a bigger problem of not being able to have shelter because they are not able to pay the rent, they're not able to pay their mortgages. So I see this as a slow process. It's going to be gradual, and it's going to take a lot of community support and discipline.
So to give you a shameless plug here, Eric, can you take a couple of minutes to tell us about, speaking of masks, your current project you've been working on of making masks for Hoosiers across the state? Figure I might have to throw it in here while I can.
Very good, thank you. Yeah, there's a Facebook group that I joined back in late March or early April called Indie Sews Masks. And we developed methods for creating Deaconess masks for long-term care facilities in Brownsburg and Indianapolis and other areas down south in Greenwood. And this group grew from about 50 people to about 1,000 people over the past couple of months. And our group has produced, some of the members of us have produced over 1,000 masks and have provided them to firefighters, to different groups within Brownsburg and other locations, and to the Indiana National Guard. We did provide about 1,000 masks to the Indiana National Guard. So the group has been very supportive. It's all volunteers, and many of the volunteers are paying for their own materials. I'm the tech support person that fixes the sewing machines and helps people online so that they can get their machines working. So that's a little bit about that. Indy Sews Masks. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome. I thought I'd throw that in there. I will say that I used to work in the uniform rental industry in the previous life, and to find anyone who can sew is an act of Congress. So kudos to you guys for doing that. Is not an easy task to do. So let's ask another question here. Who did I ask that one? Okay, let's go with we'll go with you this first time here, Eric. So COVID numbers are rising in Indiana right now. Do you believe it is time to mandate behaviors and rules for opening or continuing or reopening?
My personal opinion is yes. I think that we have been Indiana has done a good job at managing the COVID crisis. I think the task force that was put in place by the governor did a lot of things right. And I think their method of communicating to citizens was great because it was factual and it was based on numbers that we were seeing. So while we had some good things, there were also some gaps. There was a decision made early that information on individual nursing home facilities would not be shared. And this created a great deal of concern for many citizens within the state that had family members within those long-term care facilities. So I think we had a mixed bag there. The COVID response at this point has been rising again. And we have seen that in Texas, Arizona, Florida, we are seeing outbreaks of between 5,000 and 10,000 people per day. And right now in Indiana, I think our number is up around 700 outbreaks within the last day or two. We should all be wearing masks. I think Marion County, because of the high number of people infected, absolutely made the right choice to go with mask enforcement. I think if we go statewide, we're all going to be back to work a lot quicker. So I would support that.
Same for you, Stan. With the COVID numbers rising here in Indiana right now, is it time to mandate behaviors and rules for opening or / reopening?
Well, actually, I do agree with Eric on that. And I do agree that it probably is, as the governor has now gone his 5-phase plan to now 4.5 and extending it out. And unless we get in front of this is going to continue to get worse. The numbers are so much higher now than when it initially happened, and we thought it was so catastrophic when it was happening in New York. The idea that we're, let's see, what, yesterday or something, it was like over 58,000, if I'm not mistaken, new cases across the country, and what's happening in each of the states. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it's a matter of when it happens because of the infection and because of the way this virus happens to spread. I absolutely believe in protecting the rights and freedoms of Americans, but I also acknowledge that, Joe, your rights only extend to the end of my nose. So you have the right to choose what you want to do, but not to the point that you're going to kill me with your rights. You don't have the right to infect me. You wearing a mask actually protects me more than it protects you. Just like my rights only extend to the end of your nose, and I should not have the right to go out and get you sick so that you take it home and get a parent or somebody sick and kill them. So yes, I'm a very strong proponent of protecting people's right to choose and right to make their own choice, to include their own medical decisions. But this is not the same thing. This is a global pandemic. And so that your right does not extend to the right to kill everybody else just because you might be a person that has the disease, has COVID, but because you're asymptomatic, you're thinking, well, it's okay for you to go around and it'll affect everybody else. Of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. Of course, that has a significant impact on our economy. It has a significant impact on everything in our way of life, the recovery rate, everything across the board. There's also a fair amount of research that we don't even know the extent yet of this disease because it's so new. We're talking about where people that are asymptomatic are still having lung scarring and lung issues and other health concerns just because they didn't exhibit the normal symptoms associated with COVID. There's still been a medical impact, and we don't know what the long-term effects and stuff of it truly are. The idea of wearing a mask is such a minor thing, and why people so much object to it, I can only personally blame it on leadership, that we've not had the appropriate leadership for doing the appropriate thing to help protect all the citizens of the United States. That saying that we're going to have to learn to live with it is probably not the right answer. 30 years in the military, that was never the answer. The answer was then figure out the best way to deal with it, and deal with it, take care of it. If that meant a mask, you wore a mask. If that meant body armor, you wore the body armor. You did whatever was necessary, and you still got the mission done. The same thing applies to our economy and everything else. If we would implement that or follow that, it's a shame that we're talking about the idea that we're going to have to direct it, because things have become so polarized that now it's a political statement if you wear a mask, just because I'm concerned that I might get you sick. I mean, it's a shame that we've devolved to something at that level. But yes, I think it's probably, I absolutely would support it.
Good. All right, we'll start with you on this question, Stan. How do we support families getting ready for in-person school attendance during the COVID-19 pandemic? And you could extend it into, truancy issues, because maybe some families are having kids go to school and then they change their mind at the last minute when they realize what some of the problems are out there. Also, as going as far as have you guys heard any discussion of how it impacts funding for schools? Will schools be getting the full funding if, like in Brownsburg, we're only sending our kids in homeschool and they don't take any special programs? So I'll start with you on that one.
Thank you for the question. Very good question on a lot of people's minds. Also a very complicated question. And you touched on several of the reasons. Yes, the state funding formula is a little bit complicated, and the ADM amount fluctuates significantly depending on if it's a student in class full time versus students that are not, or students that are in virtual school or online school or those sorts of things. And so I would hate to see decisions being made based on funding. And I recognize that you can't just completely eliminate that from the equation, from the thought process. But, you have the full ADM amount, and then I think online gets something like 70%. Okay, so now if you're not doing it full time in school, what's the legislature going to do, and how are they going to fund that? And when that's not funded, so what? Now you're expecting the teachers teaching a partial class and an online class, doing double the work and having less of the money. I don't know how that's going to work out. I'm very concerned about it. But I'm also very concerned about just saying, all right, well, just send all the kids back, because then what's that going to do if you can't have the kids wearing masks or social distancing or those types of programs? They're doing those types of things for their own health and self-protection and the protection of their family, and what's that's going to do to our economy or our family structure and healthcare. So yes, it's a very difficult question, and also concerned about the effect of getting them back into school and a return to normalcy. Well, obviously we need an educated society. We need to continue to work on that. It kind of goes to some of your other questions. Okay, areas like Avon and Brownsburg, yeah, they can do online school and classes, but we know that areas like North Putnam, they're not really set up for it. And they don't have the high-speed internet. And so you can't really divide it up that way. It's a very difficult question. I hope with the legislature, and we know it's not the legislature's action, but how they fund and what they do, or what exceptions or what they make, has a significant impact. And while we're on this topic, I do want to do one thing. I want to do a real shout out to the leadership of the Avon School Corporation, as they were the first one in Hendricks County to shut down their schools with the first case at Hickory Elementary School, when other school corporations and other locations were just a little bit concerned oh, well, this is not going to be a big deal. It's going to go away when the weather warms. Their decisive leadership absolutely had a significant impact in keeping our numbers low for a good portion there of Hendricks County. But how they manage that when they go back, we know that it's the school corporation's decision. Those are local decisions. But some of the funding stuff associated then becomes state decisions. And it's very complicated. But do we need to do it? Yes, but I think it absolutely needs to be with social distancing. I think the kids do need to wear masks. I think there needs to be some compliance along that lines. I think the teachers and the staff absolutely need to be that way, and it needs to be able to protect their health at the same time. Hopefully, it won't be, within the next year, we'll have a vaccine and things will get closer to back to normal. But I'm very concerned about what's normal going to look like based on the decision matrix and the things that we're learning and stuff from this over time. So do I have a definitive plan on the right way to do it? I'm going to say that I don't. I don't. I need to talk to the experts, and I would need advice or recommendations. But what I can do as your state senator is I can ensure that they have the appropriate resources and funding and the things necessary to help facilitate that process and what's in the best interest of Hoosiers and those children, so that they do get an education and we continue to move forward. The state, one of the things that they have done is we do have a $2 billion rainy day fund. I'm sorry, if a global pandemic is not the time to dip into or use that rainy day fund, then I don't know what the hell you're saving it for. This is the time to do it, and I hope that they do that and realize the importance and stuff of returning to normal and getting those kids in school for their benefit.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Eric, your turn. So how do we support families getting ready for in-person school attendance during the COVID-19 pandemic? A good example, if parents decide to keep their children home from school, what truancy rules do you think we can help work with? Do you see any impact on school funding? Just trying to get your views on what you think we can do to support these families.
The research that I've done on starting up schools is basically putting the responsibility on the school systems and on the county health department. So in Hendricks County, we have 4 school systems, and the startup for those systems is all independent plans. They're all approved by the county health department, but there's quite a bit of variability between Brownsburg, Avon, Danville, and northwestern Hendricks County. The rules are different. The way they're going to manage infections is different, and it's concerning. The other thing I've found is that outside of our county and other locations such as Jay County, the approved plans include some very concerning portions. One is that in that county, students and teachers will all independently decide if they are going to wear masks. So a student during the day can take off their mask, go to the cafeteria, go outside, get on the bus, and not wear a mask. And the teacher that's assisting that class may also take off their and not wear masks. So it seems to me that some of the direction that's coming from the different counties is based on political pressure that is being put on those school systems. And it seems like guidance from the state health department is not rigorous enough. And I think we are going to see some significant outbreaks as these school systems start up in different areas. So some areas may be very good and may have good discipline, and other areas within the state are going to have the potential for outbreaks very quickly. As far as the funding sources, it does not make sense at all to me that if we're having students in Brownsburg right now, the number is between 4 and 5% that are going to go with remote learning, that the funding should be cut for the school systems, because the school systems are going to incur costs for supporting those students. And the other thing is we really ought to consider having technology such as netbook computers or low-cost technology access for those students, so that there's not a financial hardship on their families to do this remote learning. So we have internet access, which is good in some areas, but the family may have only one computer that they have to share between 4 or 5 different children. So I think it's foolish to take funding away from the schools if we have distance learning, because in fact, they're incurring more costs for the COVID. They've got to clean the schools. They've got to have more space spread out. They may not have the capacity, and they may actually have to have distance learning just to manage the number of students. And they may need to have those students home 1 or 2 days a week. We should not be cutting their funding.
I agree. I know where you and I are from are very similar areas. We actually kind of grew up in the same neck of the woods. And it is a very rural region, and it is very difficult for some of these school districts. Some of them are doing it, but it can be very difficult for these school districts to get the funding they need for the tablets and for all these different internet access. So that's a lot. I agree. Next question, I'll start with you, Eric. How do you feel about expanding vote by mail programs here in Indiana?
Well, I like the absentee voting. It's simple. You have to very carefully follow the rules. There are certain documents that you have to include. All of the T's have to be crossed and the I's have to be dotted. But I think it offers a great solution for older citizens and for citizens that have medical problems to have the right to vote. And I believe that everybody who qualifies for absentee voting should use that for this November election. I'm strongly in support of that. On the other hand, I do not believe that we are going to be able to do mail-in voting in a general sense for the November election, because we should have started a extensive mail-in voting process to make sure all of the mechanisms were in place and the documents could be managed. And we had the capacity to handle all of these paper ballots in January this year. And our administration at the state didn't do it. And I believe that was due to the political pressure from the National Republican Party. So when the election is completed, I believe next year we need to start the legislative session, and we need to very much promote 100% mail-in ballots for the future of Indiana.
Thank you. Now for you, Stan, how do you feel about expanding the vote by mail program in Indiana?
Well, across the country, I think there's about 6 states that have all mail-in voting now. It has to do with their population density. I mean, states like Montana, Alaska, where it's not feasible to have vote centers and expect everybody to be able to get to them. And historically, they have no voter fraud or manipulation associated with mail-in. The argument that some people like to put out that it increases the probability of voter fraud is absolutely false. There is a lot of good reasons that we should have been doing or authorizing mail-in voting for the protection of the citizenry, so that they should not have to choose between the potential of possibly getting sick or infected so that they can execute their constitutional right to vote. So I strongly support it. And yes, there is a difference between the mail-in and the absentee, because the absentee voting actually has a list about, I don't know, 10, 11 things that qualify you to be able to just vote on an absentee basis. That's if you're going to be away from the polling locations from 6 a.m. till 6 p.m., be it normally traveling or vacation. If you have any type of disability, you can do absentee. If you're 65 or older, you can do absentee. If you have official election duties where you're working that day, you can do absentee. Or if you're normally to schedule normal work schedule from 6 to 6, you can do it. If you're confined due to illness or injury or a caregiver during that 12-hour period, you can do absentee. If it's a religious discipline or a holiday, you can request an absentee. If you're on the state confidential address program, you can request an absentee vote. If you're in the military or the police, you can request an absentee vote. If you're actually a serious sex offender, you can request an absentee vote. Or if you have the unavailability of transportation, you can actually accept it. Those are the excuses that are available for absentee voting on the state website. Most people are not aware of all the options and things that are available. So people should explore that or take a look before they decide, or as they decide what they're going to do. And because this election is probably, and I know you hear it all the time, but based on things that are happening at the national level, this election is probably the most important election in our history because of the things that are currently happening and what we need to do to fix them if we have to go through 4 more years. So I would just encourage everybody to go vote, be it an absentee vote, be it an early vote, so you don't have to stand in line as long. Early voting starts a month prior to the election. Here in Hendricks County, we have 6 early voting locations that people can also get to, so that it reduces the amount of contact that you have, because Eric is absolutely right. The state saw what the turnout was in the primary, the number of Democrats that requested absentee voting or vote by mail. And as a result, they are not going to approve it. They're not going to have it because they're afraid that they will lose. When reality, statistically, it doesn't favor either party to absentee vote. It's just a matter of getting more citizens to vote. So I personally absolutely support it. I absolutely know, or I believe in my heart, that it's not going to happen, and we're running out of time in order for those things to happen. It's not going to happen for November. So people need to think in advance, what am I going to do? Do any of those 11 exceptions apply to you so that you can do absentee versus vote, which is basically vote by mail, absentee vote, or go to one of the locations and vote early, or what's going to happen to you on election day. But please, you have to vote.
Thank you. All right, we're going to go in a little direction again. So I'll start with Stan. What type of policies, proposals, and programs would you hope to implement or support to help address racial injustice here in Indiana? This is a big topic right now. We all saw what happened over in our neighborhood in Bloomington. So this is one of the big topics going on. So what would you do, policies, programs, proposals to help implement or support or to help address racial injustices in Indiana?
Well, unfortunately, Indiana does have a bit of a history associated with some racial injustice and racial issues. I would start by, we need a comprehensive hate crime legislation. Absolutely, a comprehensive hate crime legislation, not the watered down bill that we got here recently. It'll make it a lot easier to ensure that people that are committing these hate crimes are actually appropriately tried. The next thing that I would do, I have to refer back to my time in the military. I entered the military in the early 70s and retired in the mid, in 2005. I saw the racial problems that occurred in the early 70s. I lived through those, and I saw the way the military first attempted to handle it one way and then eventually handled it another way. The second way they handled it, which absolutely was the most effective, which was just to stop recognizing, they recognized that trying to convince somebody or change the way somebody's internal bias system works was not effective. But what did work is limit somebody from their behavior. So recognizing I can't change how you feel or how you think, I can certainly change how you act. And if you act inappropriately, and if you just display or anything racial comes out of your mouth, there were penalties associated with that, to include court martials and discharge and all sorts of things. And behavior quickly changed over time. And by the time I retired, I would say that it was from the level that I was, or what I could see, I saw no evidence of racial injustice in the Air Force at the locations that I was at. And I would say that the number of interracial marriages actually, there were a lot of people, which is another indication to me that a lot of those barriers were in fact breaking down. So one of the things that I would do is anything that had public money associated with it. For example, if you're a fireman or a school teacher or a policeman and you get paid through my tax dollars should never pay somebody to act in an inappropriate racial manner. If you do, there should be repercussions associated with that, all the way up to include losing your job, or depending on what the action is, criminal charges, depending. And if you refuse to allow racial behavior, stop allowing our tax dollars to pay people to act in an inappropriate racial fashion, it will fix it over time. The private sector is a much harder thing to be able to fix, because being able to control or legislate that, then everything goes through the courts. But anything that I spend my public dollar on, if you take a public dollar, you're a school teacher, and you distribute or display inappropriate racial behavior, as far as I'm concerned, you should lose your job and we'll hire somebody else that is not a racial person. I don't care. I mean, it's just inappropriate behavior. And on top of that, I would certainly do away with or outlaw in Indiana qualified immunity for law enforcement. Law enforcement is supposed to be there to protect and serve. And that's the oath that they take, to protect and serve. The idea that one law enforcement is standing there watching another officer put his knee on the neck of George Floyd and kill him. He is watching a crime in commission, and he has taken an oath. He's taken an oath to protect and serve. And why is he not stopping that crime in commission? Because of qualified immunity, that the person that's actually doing it is the one that's determined what is the appropriate amount of force necessary. That is wrong. I would absolutely do away with that and change the law for that and make it a requirement, or make it part of the law where somebody could be tried or acted. The policeman should absolutely protect the community. My tax dollars, I should not be paying somebody to treat me in an inappropriate racial fashion. Those are my tax dollars. They should go to serve the community in the community good. And I think you can attach that. Now, with that being said, I certainly want to give a shout out to all the policemen that are doing a good job. No doubt about it. The police, the military, everybody else, everybody is on a continuum. There are some that are truly great. Most of us in the middle of just doing a good job and doing the best that we can. And then there are some that are really poor. Those some that are really poor, that are committing those crimes, those are the ones that we need to weed out. Those are the ones we need to do something about it. And the rest of them that want to do something about it, we need to enable them so that they can police themselves and prosecute, eliminate, separate, whatever is necessary, so that those type of crimes don't happen, so that we never have another incident like what happened to George Floyd.
I like that answer. That'll work. I'll go to you, Eric. Let's ask you. So what types of policies, proposals, programs would you hope to implement or support to help address racial injustice?
Well, I'm going to support what Stan said, and specifically on the hate crimes bill, Senate 198 that was passed last year. We need to go back the next legislative cycle and fix the problems, because there were a number of exclusions which were just part of the original bill and then got amended out. So we need to fix that. We're in agreement that all organizations that have bad actors in them are being seriously hurt, be those firefighters, policemen, where those people are committing crimes are devastating to the people within those organizations that are responsible and caring about their community. So it's just a terrible situation where lots of upstanding people that are providing service to us are having to deal with protests and all the anger that's built up because of criminal behavior. So absolutely in agreement. I would like to see the education curriculum for our state updated and modernized so that we understand issues that relate to social justice, be that race bigotry, be that problems with bias against LGBTQ people and people who are Asian, who are in any way different from the person that you are. We need to build into our education curriculum social information, because if they're at home getting bigotry from their family, then the only place where they're going to see any alternative information is going to be at school. We saw in Bedford where a person had displayed on the back of their pickup truck a noose. Well, it's unfortunate to let that guy know. If he was educated, he would know that's a federal crime and that he's going to be prosecuted for that. So threatening people when you're ignorant about the law is a problem, especially if the education curriculum doesn't cover that. So I think we need to update the Indiana education organization and to emphasize that at appropriate levels. That's the grade school, middle school, and also in high school. We need to make this a priority.
So both of you guys, and we'll start with you on this one. I know part of you have Brownsburg or Avons or other towns, but a lot of your districts have rural regions. And a question was asked, the rural areas rely more and more on volunteer fire departments whose equipment is outdated. These first responders are the first critical line of defense for people who do not live close to a hospital or have limited ambulance services. How do you propose that we address the need for this outdated equipment? You first, Eric.
I don't have an answer for that at this point. It's very risky. And I think what happens is it's going to have a direct impact on insurance underwriting as people do risk assessments for businesses and homes within our county. So there will be financial damages if we choose not to keep the equipment updated and those firefighters appropriately staffed and their equipment up to date. I think the financial impact is going to be much larger than evaluating and providing funds to those fire protection groups. We need to fund them, and we need to fund them appropriately so that we are protected. And the cost of fires and a risk to the life of the firefighters is unacceptable.
Thank you. And for you, Stan, again, the rural areas rely more and more on volunteer fire departments whose equipment is outdated. These first responders are the first critical line of defense for people who do not live close to a hospital or have limited ambulance services. How do you propose to address this for the outdated equipment?
That's a very good question, and I appreciate it. The equipment for firefighting is funded, if I'm not mistaken, through the trustee's office in those rural areas for those townships. I don't know what grants are available for them to assist with that. And I don't know the exact funding. So that's something that I'm going to need to get additional information and learn. I have to admit, I know that there's a problem, and I have talked to several people that have had problems, especially when you start to transfer over to the medical side on the EMS thing, on where they had to go where it would actually have been faster for them not to have called EMS, to simply put the injured person in their own car and drive them directly to the hospital that it needed, because of the way some of the service agreements and things are set up in the rural areas. The idea that North Putnam County has no medical, and some of the agreements on how that area is divided up. I've recently had a discussion, and I'm having a hard time recalling the exact data on some of that, but that's absolutely problematic. They should have that coverage. It should exist. We are the richest nation in the world. We should not have people dying for lack of medical care or access to services. And it should not be necessarily associated with the flow of money. That's not the determination of value of life. So exactly how to fix it, I can't say I have an answer here today, but I certainly lean towards a system that can provide those services, that's paid for single payer, because that type of a system can then ensure that you have those minimum EMS services to get you to where you need to be, or what you need for safety. And I know that scares a lot of people when you start talking about single payer healthcare. But the reality is, it scares me because I have good medical insurance, and I'm concerned when somebody wants to talk about taking away my good medical insurance. But I would want to see a system that could be a single payer, that could be settled or set up, and as it's fully implemented, get allow people then to come to it versus a mandatory shift to it, which would allow or enable more and or better care over time. But I don't think you force people to it, using a jackhammer. I think if the system is set up right and done well and provides good services, that people will migrate to it over time. When you look at the economy associated with somebody sending out an EMS out into Putnam County, and then they have to bring them back to this particular unit, and that unit is not a trauma 1 or doesn't have the right level, and then they have to take them to the next closest unit, and then they may medevac them over, and the reality is they could have been there an hour before if they had just gotten in a car and driven to the hospital because they knew where they needed to go. That's not emergency medical service. That's not appropriate. It absolutely needs to be fixed. I'm sorry to say that I have only read a little bit on it, and I only have a little bit of information. I can't fully give a complete answer, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that is a concern and an issue that needs to be addressed.
Well, we're coming up on our hour, and so now is time for shameless plug time, like joeforhendricks.com. If you go to joeforhendricks.com, just a shameless plug. Stan, give us our shameless plug. Where should they go to find out more about Stan Albaugh?
Well, once again, I'm Stan Albaugh. I'm running for the Indiana State Senate in District 24. I'm a retired Air Force colonel with over 30 years of active duty service, as if you can't tell it between everything I've got hanging on the walls behind me. You can go to my website, which is just stanalbaugh.com. On my website, I've got links to everything from Act Blue, if you'd like to make a donation, to the voter website, if you would like to check and verify or make sure that you're registered to vote at your current address. You have to update for your current address to be eligible to vote. Please do that. That's much more important to make sure that you get out and your voice be heard in November.
And you too, Eric, like where I keep talking about joeforhendricks.com, and on my Facebook page, Joe Walsh for County Commissioner. Give me a shameless plug. Give me your shameless shout out for everyone to come find out more about you.
All right. You're going to find me on Facebook. It's going to be Eric Shotwell for Indiana House District 28. And that's where you can find me. And if you have any questions or follow up, please contact me.
Awesome. I appreciate your time today. I had a lot of fun with this. We got a lot of good questions, a lot of good feedback. And again, folks, if you're watching this, made it to the end, please hit that share button down there at the bottom, share with everyone else. And I'm going to let everyone go for this great boosted conversation. I hope you guys have a great and safe weekend. And goodbye.
Thank you.